Welcome back to the channel, guys, and thanks to everyone who keeps watching the videos, keeps pressing that like button, keeps subscribing. Thank you all very much. Now, a few weeks ago I asked for some video suggestions that I could do while I was in lockdown, and one that came up numerous times actually was people asking what do I carry in my seat box. So I thought, well, I've got half an hour spare today, so why not, let's run through it. Believe me, there's nothing exciting, but as you wanted to see it, I'm always willing to show you that bit. So touch on the box first. I use an Absolute Carbon. I used an Absolute 36 before that, and then I used Absolute Compact. I think it was the first version before that. So I've had, my last 3 seat boxes have been Preston. Obviously now I work for Preston, so that's obviously the case. But the last 2, you know, I got them myself, so I can't speak highly enough of the seat boxes. The only problem I ever had with any of those 3 seat boxes was the first Absolute Compact that I had. One of the old clips broke off in my van. That is the only issue I've had. I've never had leg slippage, I've never had things breaking off, I've never had the drawers break, I've never had them come open. It's just been, they've been faultless. I really, you know, and that's not just me with a Preston hat on, that's me talking from a previous customer, you know, as well. You know, I had to pay for those boxes. So I thought it'd be a really good idea to run through this. Like I say, it is the Carbon that I use, which sadly is no longer in production. These were a limited edition. They are things of beauty. I mean, mine could do a good wash, to be honest with you. It's a bit mouldy. I ain't used it for that long. That it's just all a bit grimy. But as you can see, I've got prototype legs on all the way around. You know, we're always testing stuff. In this case, I've got prototype legs that might be for an upcoming project. But I've already gone through, you know, all my attachments and that in a previous video, so let's get into the box itself. I use it in the configuration as it comes when you buy it, or when I bought it, and I believe the Absolute comes with the same. It's got a shallow drawer and a deep drawer. So we'll start there. The shallow drawer is where I keep all my rigs. Now, the first thing actually, you may notice I don't have a stacker underneath. A couple of reasons for that. The main one is I don't actually carry that many rigs. I'm not a big rig carrier guy. I tend to keep them at home in stacks and stuff like that, and then think about what I'm doing, where I'm fishing, and then put a few rigs that I actually need into my box. That way I'm not confusing myself. My rig selection is very simple anyway. I use very few floats really, and I just find that simplifies my process. That I've seen so many anglers go to the bank with, you know, stacks this high of different rigs and that, and let's be honest, on most commercial fisheries you only need a handful of floats. You maybe need a carp pellets for presenting bigger baits, an F1 maggot float will do you for winter time fishing, you might want a Chianti for silvers, and then you're going to want something like a carp shallow for your edge fishing and your shallow fishing in summer. So there's only really a handful of floats that I need, and like I say, I don't have tons and tons of rigs. I don't believe in it. So the first part is my cross drawer. So whenever I choose where I'm going fishing, you know, like I say, a lot of the time I'm using the similar sort of rigs anyway, so it doesn't really matter. I always like pick a few rigs out of my stacker and then put them in here. But this is like a typical commercial tray for me. I've got some 4x16 F1 pellets and carp pellets. I use the carp pellets a lot for my hard pellet fishing. Say Shearsby Valley, where it's quite deep, a 4x16 carp pellet with its 2mm bristle, just perfect. But then for most of my pellet fishing, it'll be the F1 pellet. I've got some carp shallows. Again, a 4x10 is the ultimate shallow float as far as I'm concerned. And even late last year, I was doing quite a lot of edge fishing with that. Even though it's a tiny float nowadays for modern edge fishing, I found that really good. So I'm going to do a lot more experimenting with that this year, using the light float in the margins. And I'll probably do a video on that at some point. I've got my heavier carp shallows, of course, my 4x16s and 4x14s, which are brilliant for like when you've got fish swirling about in shallow water and in the edge, and you need stability. Those floats are just brilliant. They're short, compact, and they never break. So you're just gonna, they're just perfect. I've got a few edge floats. These really are reserved for special days. Really, I think they've got a really thick bristle. And I think for me, that float comes into its own when I'm visiting somewhere like maybe a Larford or probably Hayfield or somewhere like that. If I was going Hallcroft maybe, somewhere where you're fishing for big fish and you're only going to get an odd chance. By that I mean you're feeding down the edge and you're sort of might only catch 1, 2, maybe 3 fish right at the end of the session. You need to make sure that it's bang on, you don't strike at a line, you don't foul hook them, then I'd probably turn to the edge float rather than the carp shallow. And I'd probably go for like a 4x16 as well, like a heavy one. Another little beauty I do have in here actually, another use for this edge float, I actually use them for mugging in the summer. What I've done, I chopped them right down, so they're probably only 2 inches in length. I then fish with a bulk underneath it, and then a 15-inch hook length below it. That's just how I've had quite a bit of success mugging, certainly last year. And that little float, because it's so visible, you can just flick it around and you can always see it no matter what the light conditions are, which is really important when you're mugging. Obviously, you're not picking a shadow and flicking into it. You're judged by where the fish are. You know, you're governed by where the fish are. So having something like that with its really thick bristle that I've just chopped down, I find really important. I've got a couple of diamonds there. To be honest, I don't use the diamonds that much. They just don't really come into my fishing, to be honest. I tend to use the carp pellet instead. Over on this side, I've got a whole row of Chiantis. Now, I was doing a bit of maggot short fishing at the end of last year at Shearsby, you know, for F1s. And normally I'd use an F1 maggot style float for that. But I actually use the Chianti. You're quite fortunate there because you've got silver water on every peg. And wherever I can fish in silver water with a black bristle, then I'll turn to a Chianti because I just prefer I just prefer our cane bristle fishes, to be honest with you. So I've got a load of Chiantis there that I've got tied up, and then I've got some little F1 shallow floats in 4x8s that I use for my F1 shallow fishing. I just have one size tied up for that. I can either bolt the shot or I can string it out. Just lovely little floats. And then the last little secret weapon that I've got here, something that I came across later towards the back end of last summer, and little coral blobs that I've not used since I was a kid. But at Shearsby, again, the fish sometimes come into this much water, probably less. They come right against the bank on some days, and they can be really tricky to catch. But fishing paste with one of those right in that shallow water can be a really good way of catching them. So that's it. Like I say, I just take whatever rigs I need. That, to be honest with you, is a pretty good all-around tray. The next drawer is actually, this is where, again, we're always testing tackle. You can see here I've got my deep drawer, and it's actually the drawer off the Inception box, the new Inception station that's come out. It's got the dividers in it. I've had this in my box for a good 18 months now. And that is, you know, that's one of the things that we do all the time at Preston. We're always testing stuff. So I was to test this, and it's plastifying colours. Again, nothing extravagant really to see here. On this side I have plummets, bristle grease, marker pen, disgorgers, I've got my banding tool, just bits and pieces that I feel like I can access quickly. Got my like baiting needles, things like that, bander tools, just all little handy bits. Can sit there, and then if I need to access it in a match, I'm dead quick and I'm on it. In this one I've got a few bombs, an odd feeder, a few line stops, my stopwatch, again very handy. I've got an odd like spool with hook lengths on that I use when I go feeder fishing. I've done a lot of that this year, but that just shows you how little I actually go in here because they're from last winter. Odd feeder, just bits and pieces really. Again on this I've got an odd bit of line. I rarely use this, to be honest. I tie all my rigs at home, I tie all my hook lengths at home, but every now and again you're going to need a bit of line, so I just carry a bit of reflow power and a bit of AccuPower. I've got an odd hook just in case I need to tie a hook on, but again, I don't really do that. A few more hook lengths, punches. I've got this actually, which is worth mentioning, a little tungsten putty. It doesn't come into play very often, but sometimes I use it as like back shots above my feeder. That can work quite nicely. And then over finally in this little tray, I've got a few little cad pots. I've got some pre-tied hook lengths there, just bits and bobs again. I've got some bait bands. I got quite into using bait bands straight on the hook rather than hair rigged last year. I really like that. So that's why they're in there. I've got a little tub here with some feeder links in that I've made. Again, just another little bits box here with some more swivels in. Again, rarely go in any of them, to be honest with you. But like I say, nothing too elaborate. Just bits and bobs really. Probably carry way more than I actually need there. Right, now we go underneath the seat. This is again, just a bit of a nothing tray really. You can see that. I've got just an odd pole rig in here that I tend to, when I've used the rig, I tend to bosh it in here so I know that I've got to retie it. I've got some F1 maggots in there, obviously from my last outing. What else have we got in here? I've got my method moulds, 3 sizes of method moulds. I've got a little loop puller thing that I got free with a Kart magazine a few years ago. I thought it'd be handy, never use it. Spare bander, because you never know when you're going to lose one. I've got a few spare hook lengths from a method feeder fishing. Sometimes I use braid, if I'm allowed to use braid from hook lengths when I'm commercial fishing with a method. I do like to use braid if I'm allowed, and I find it's easy to store them on these, daisy chained together. I've got a few hex mesh feeders in there. That was probably from testing. Again, I've probably had them in my box for 15 months or more. I've got my little butt gripper. Got some tape, you never know when you're going to need that. Got a few shock leaders tied on a little EVA spool. This is quite a nice little thing to talk about, and I know Dean Bayliss has spotted this a few times, and it's my little mugging waggler. I make these out of little Corum inline blobs, and they're a brilliant little float. They take barely any shot. They're 2 gram, or if you do it with the preloading that's already on the inline blob, you don't need any shot at all. But for mugging, with really light mainline, something like £3 float max that's coming out really soon. That's what I was using last summer. That is a brilliant little tool, just to flick it around dead quick, dead quietly. It doesn't make a splash, it settles immediately. Just a nice little tool to have. I've got 3 or 4 of those in my net bag. Again, I've got a latte there from winter fishing, and that is it. Got a few like bits and pieces that I've modified, like a feeder there with some tape on it. That's for feeding like expanders when I go to Barston. I often ram expanders in there. It's got a cap on the end. It's only a small feeder, but I ram bait in there, and that has worked for me in the past. And that is it. I've got an odd broken float in there, and that's it. That is my box. It's pretty sparse, I think you'll agree. I don't carry loads of kit. There's way more in there than there needs to be. But again, I like to think it is pretty much, kept to a minimum, and I think that's really important, especially with a rig front. You don't want too many rigs. So there you go, guys. I hope you found this quite interesting, and we'll see you again on the next video.